Hello and welcome to Art Masters with me, Mrs. Portilla. Today we are going to be learning about artists for Art Masters. We're going to learn a little bit of history about this artist. We're going to see some slides of their work, and we're going to see a little glimpse of what this month's art project will be. Today I will tell you a story about the making of an American artist named Georgia O'Keeffe. Our story begins just before the turn of the century in 1887, when Georgia O'Keeffe was born. She grew up on a large farm in Wisconsin, surrounded by other farms. She had 6 brothers and sisters. There were no forests or buildings, only farms that seemed to go on forever. One winter, when she was 9, she spent hours working on a drawing of the snow-covered farm outside her window. When she realized she could leave the white of the paper to show the snow, she felt it was magic. After that, she spent her life working on how best to paint and draw. When she was 12, her mother arranged for Georgia and her sisters to take private art lessons. That was the year she decided she would become an artist. You can see her as she looked at the height of her long career next to the U.S. postage stamp created in her honor. The painting printed on the stamp, called Red Poppy, is one of her most famous. When she graduated from high school, she went to one of the best art colleges in America, the Chicago Art Institute. While there, she studied with some of the greatest art teachers. But things were different then. There were very few women in colleges those days, and even fewer in art classes. O'Keeffe had to work very hard in order to prove that she could paint as well as a man. After she learned everything she could at the Art Institute, she went to New York to study the Art Students League. New York was an exciting place. Poets, writers, painters, musicians all traveled to New York to be a part of the new modern America. In addition to working hard in school, O'Keeffe visited art galleries and museums to see what other artists were painting. She met an important art gallery owner, Alfred Stieglitz. She thought he was one of the most interesting and powerful people she had ever met. When O'Keeffe's mother became ill, she took a job as an illustrator, and she took more art classes. One of her teachers taught her about the art of China and Japan. The Chinese masters used simple shapes. Their composition or arrangement was clean and uncluttered. She tried using the ideas of Chinese masters in her own art. She remembered how she used to like to watch the sunrise over the hills on the farm. She decided to use the simple shapes of the Chinese masters to paint the sunrise. She painted several pictures of the sun rising above the land in watercolor. She liked this new way of painting. The shapes were simple. The composition was uncluttered, like the wide open spaces. She liked this better than all the work she had done before. Is this an abstract or a realistic painting? It is more abstract because it's so simplified. Georgia looked back over all the work she had done before. She thought it should have been simpler shapes and stronger compositions. She thought the colors could have been cleaner and brighter. She started all over. She started with simple drawings in charcoal, which is a very soft black chalk, and then watercolor. She worked for hours and hours. She used ideas drawn from the art of China and Japan, simple shapes and clean, uncluttered compositions or arrangements. She tacked up the drawings and paintings all around her apartment. She compared them to the work that she had seen in Stieglitz's gallery. She thought maybe hers might be just as good, but she wasn't sure. She wanted to get someone else's opinion, so she mailed some of the work to her good friend Anita, who was an artist in New York. She added a note asking that the drawings not be shown to anyone. When Anita received the package, she was too excited to pay any attention to the notes. She showed the drawings to Stieglitz, who thought they were the most wonderful work to enter his gallery in a long time. Meanwhile, O'Keeffe kept working on her new, simpler shapes in painting. She took a job teaching art at the college in Texas, and she continued to write to her friend Anita about her progress. She was painting striking watercolors, like large, dark red leaves on white. She began to use a glass palette, which could be cleaned easily and thoroughly so her colors would remain pure and fresh. She also started using a different brush for each color. That way she could really be sure each color was pure. She kept careful records of every color she mixed so she could use it again in later paintings. She applied paint with the tiniest possible brushstrokes. She wanted them to be invisible. Can you see any brushstrokes here? I can't. She also started using oil paint instead of watercolor. Oil paint stays wet longer and can be blended more easily than watercolor. Do you see how the dark red blends into the light red to show many values of the red? O'Keeffe continued to write and visit Steiglitz as often as she could. He was impressed by O'Keeffe's honesty and intelligence. He was amazed by her great beauty and most of all her work. Steiglitz was falling in love. O'Keeffe liked Steiglitz's photographs. He was a photographer as well. She loved the encouragement he gave her. O'Keeffe was also falling in love. Steiglitz begged her to come to New York to live. He was in a position to offer her an apartment with a studio and the opportunity to paint all day, every day. This was an offer she couldn't refuse. So only after 1 year teaching at the college level, O'Keeffe joined Steiglitz in New York. Soon they married and moved into an apartment on the highest floor in one of New York's modern skyscrapers, the Shelton. Georgia kept her own last name. This was a new idea at the time. Living in the skyscraper was an adventure. In the cold winter months, the wind whisked around the building and shook its huge steel frame. Sometimes it shook and swayed so much it felt like they were living on a boat. When Georgia was on the street looking up at the building, she was always amazed at the sight. One day she looked up just as the sun was coming into view at the top of the building. The blinding light played tricks on her eyes, making the building appear to have a bite taken from it by the sun. She couldn't wait to paint what she had seen. As soon as she could, she stretched a large piece of canvas and began painting. Her memory of the sight was so complete that she was able to start the painting in the upper left corner and continue to the lower right corner without going back over any part. If you notice, the buildings in the back are smaller and have less detail. O'Keeffe painted many different views of the city. Here's a different view of a New York skyscraper. What is different about this view? This view is from another building rather than from below, and it's at night. O'Keeffe uses perspective to give the feeling of space in this painting. She put one great big building in the foreground and some smaller buildings in the background. She also chose not to use a lot of details, and she left out all of the people. O'Keeffe often said that she preferred great open spaces to people. She definitely liked the country better than the city. She was especially happy when she and Steiglitz could leave the city for the summer. They spent the hot months at the family summer home in the country. She loved the country, with its vast open spaces and very few people. One summer, she painted the sun setting behind the hills. She'd found an old empty building on the property at the summer home and had turned it into a studio. Where everyone else was swimming and boating, O'Keeffe was painting. Painting always came first for her. O'Keeffe used her red brush to paint the different values of red in the foreground or front hills. She used shades of red to create the dark values of the hill. She used tints of red to create light values. The tint is the color plus white, and the shading is the color like red plus black. In the background, she painted the sun a very light value, and then she painted the rest of the sky a very dark value. By putting the darkest color all around the sun, she made the sun appear brighter. And if you notice, she blended very carefully and you don't see any brush strokes. One summer, O'Keeffe decided not to go to the summer home with the Steiglitz family. Instead, she wanted to travel west to find new things to paint. She traveled by train to visit friends in the artist colony in New Mexico. She loved being whisked through the great American West. She was so happy and excited she couldn't wait to begin painting. She painted Black Cross, New Mexico. Her friends lent her a studio. It was a small space made of adobe, which is a mixture of clay, straw, sand, and water. Adobe is a common building material in New Mexico. Georgia liked its tan color and smooth texture. She painted many pictures of adobe houses and churches. For this painting, O'Keeffe included only a small part of the church. What has she done to show deep space? The foreground cross is very, very large, and the background hills are smaller. They get smaller and smaller as they go back, which gives the painting a sense of perspective. This next slide will show you O'Keeffe's painting of the same cross with a different view. O'Keeffe liked to play with the idea of scale or size in her paintings. She loved to increase the size of things and make them fill the canvas so that they looked larger than they really were. When O'Keeffe made the cross fill the canvas, it looked much larger than it really was. If you go to Taos, New Mexico, the Ranchos de Taos Church is still there and you can see it. You can even walk all the way around to see the back, which was the most interesting side to O'Keeffe. O'Keeffe liked to walk behind the church to see the unusual adobe shapes. She painted this view of the church many times. Each time it looked very different depending on the light. The painting became one of O'Keeffe's most famous, and because of it, the church is now famous too. Notice how the background is dark and the foreground is light. The background has dark values and the foreground has light values. O'Keeffe loved this church because it had simple shapes. It was peaceful and uncluttered. She loved New Mexico too, but when fall approached, she knew she had to return to New York. She wanted to take something from the desert with her that she could paint in New York. There were no flowers on the desert, but there were interesting rocks and bones. So she packed up a barrel of bones to take back to her studio in New York. Back in New York, O'Keeffe painted another view of the city at night. She worked hard on the composition or the arrangement of the painting. Her composition is made of simple rectangles, but notice how the diagonal street light creates a feeling of deep space. She used tints of colors for lights and shades of colors for the buildings and dark streets. The colors were clear and crisp. It was a masterpiece. However, there were many male artists in New York at the time who were also painting city scenes, and their work seemed to get all the attention. O'Keeffe was disappointed that her paintings of New York were not giving at least the same attention and compliments. She was also disappointed to see how much attention was given to European art. She felt that in America, attention should be given to American art. That's when Georgia O'Keeffe decided to paint an American painting. She pulled horses and cows' skulls from her barrel of bones and placed them all around her studio. Then she began to paint. As she worked, she thought about her long walks on the hot, dry desert. She thought about the beautiful sunsets and the terrible winds. She remembered the peace and quiet. She thought that the desert and the cattle were a major part of America. She wanted her painting to be thoroughly American, so she added a blue background and red stripes on each side. When Stieglitz exhibited O'Keeffe's desert paintings in his gallery, everyone made a big fuss over them. Soon his gallery was filled with people wanting to see the wonderful paintings of the American desert. Even the critics who had not noticed O'Keeffe's city paintings started giving her lots of attention. They wrote admiring articles about her work in newspapers. After that, she spent every summer in New Mexico painting the desert landscape and every winter in New York. One summer, she took her Model A Ford to the desert. While driving, she wondered why she couldn't just do some paintings right from the car. She took the passenger seat out of the car and set a big canvas on the back seat. Then she drove far out into the desert, farther than she could have ever walked. At last, she had found a quiet place to paint where no one could interrupt her. There she started a series of remarkable paintings from her car. She painted the shapes of the hills and the rocks and bones. She was happy to be alone. O'Keeffe did not limit herself to just painting landscapes. She also became famous for her floral or flower paintings. O'Keeffe loved the soft, gentle shapes of flowers. She noticed that all the busy city people never took the time to look at nature the way she did, so she decided to make it really big so they would have to notice. The white trumpet flower is not very large, but she painted it almost 3 feet high and 4 feet wide. Once again, she was using the scale or the size to force us to see something differently. Today, we see her images printed on calendars, postcards, and posters. But in O'Keeffe's time, this was a very new idea, and she was considered a very modern artist. O'Keeffe painted the shapes and colors of hundreds of flowers. She used her idea of clean, uncluttered composition with simple shapes and colors in all her work. Soon she became very famous. Museums and galleries all over the world wanted her paintings. Her art shows would average 1,000 visitors a week. She started getting awards and honors. She received an honorary Doctor of Fine Arts degree from William and Mary College in Virginia. When a series of paintings called Calla Lilies sold for the highest sum ever paid to a living American artist, it gave her a lifetime financial security. That's when O'Keeffe became very particular about who she would sell her paintings to. She didn't want people to buy them so they could sell them at a higher price later. She wanted people to buy them because they loved them as she did. She worked hard on her paintings and felt they were like her children. Is the background a dark or light value? There's dark shades of color in the background, and the foreground is very light with light tints of color. Now that O'Keeffe was finally a successful artist, she could travel wherever she wanted. She visited Europe briefly, but did not paint anything there. No matter where she traveled, she always came back to New Mexico to paint. One day when O'Keeffe was walking on the desert, she suddenly came upon a pelvis bone, or a hip bone, sitting on top of a hill. Since the bone was at eye level, she could see the sky through it. She picked it up and held it against the sky and saw the blue through the hole in the bone. That's when she started painting pelvis bones. Sometimes, as in this painting, she painted a landscape of her favorite mountain in the distance. She made the mountain seem far away by using scale. The pelvis bone is large and the mountains are small. The bone appears to float very close to the viewer. The floating bone makes this work seem less realistic. In addition to her paintings of flowers and bones, O'Keeffe painted abstract pictures that seemed to be about water and wind and stones. Even though this is abstract, we can still recognize some of O'Keeffe's favorite shapes in this painting. The mountains in the distance, the close-up view of a flower-like shape, the curvy wavy edges, and the vast sky. Stieglitz enjoyed showing O'Keeffe's work in his gallery, but he was quite a bit older than she was, and his health eventually began to fail. Several years before she painted this painting, Stieglitz had died. His death made O'Keeffe very sad. She felt she had lost more than a husband, but also a friend and a partner. Now that there was nothing to keep her in New York, O'Keeffe bought a ranch in New Mexico. At the age of 62, the same year she painted Black Place green, she moved there and devoted the rest of her life to her work. Even at 72, when most artists have retired, she was still painting brilliantly. Here again, O'Keeffe used her clean composition and pure colors as she did when she was younger. Notice how she still used the light and dark values of one color to create shapes. The different values of brown create foreground shapes, and the different values of blue create the background shapes. She also still blends the values into the light values, so the light into the dark. These shapes create a feeling of nature, of the earth or the sky. Even though this is an abstract painting, it still kind of reminds us of a landscape. No matter how famous she became, she always preferred to be alone so she could paint without interruption. She made it a habit to stay away from people, cameras, and reporters. In her lifetime, she created 900 works of art. Over the years, she earned a fortune from her art. In her 90s, her eyesight became very bad and she could no longer paint. She died peacefully at the age of 98. So for our project, we're going to be painting large-scale flowers. Notice how this small flower is drawn very, very big to almost fill up the whole canvas. This composition has 3 flowers, almost filling up the entire canvas with simple leaf shapes. For this flower is a little bit more abstract because it's zoomed in so close. We're just looking at the center of the flower, and the whole flower goes completely off the canvas. A quote from O'Keeffe, "Nobody sees a flower, really. It's so small. We haven't time, and to see it takes time. Like to have a friend takes time." So how did she paint these small flowers? She painted them very large and bright. So that's what we are going to be doing today. We're going to be zooming in on these flowers, filling up our canvas, and then we're going to use watercolor pencils for that bright color value. So I hope you guys are ready and looking forward to drawing our large, simplified flowers by O'Keeffe.